What if I told you the Second World War wasn't lost on the frozen steppes of Russia or on the beaches of Normandy? What if the fatal blow, the one mistake that guaranteed the destruction of the Third Reich, was delivered not with a tank or a bomb, but with a microphone? It happens on December 11th, 1941. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler strides to a podium inside the Kroll Opera House. The world is holding its breath. 4 days earlier, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, dragging a stunned America into the war. But that's Japan's war. Hitler's pact with Tokyo is defensive. He has no obligation to join in. His generals are praying he stays out of it. His U-boats are under strict orders to avoid provoking the Americans. In this moment, Hitler has a free pass. He can let his Japanese allies tie up the entire U.S. military in the Pacific, while he focuses all his might on a struggling Soviet Union. Instead, he leans into the microphone and, with his own voice, signs his own death warrant. To understand the sheer madness of this decision, we have to go back just a few months. It is late 1941, and the Nazi war machine, for the first time, is starting to sputter. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union launched on June 22nd, was supposed to be over in weeks. Hitler himself predicted, "We have only to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." But the door didn't kick in. It's now December. General Guderian's panzer tanks, the tip of the spear for Army Group Center, have ground to a halt just outside Moscow, their lubricants frozen solid in temperatures of -40 degrees. German soldiers, still in summer uniforms, are suffering more casualties from frostbite than from combat. They are out of supplies, out of momentum, and facing a massive Soviet counteroffensive. The Blitzkrieg is dead, frozen in the Russian snow. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, America is a sleeping giant. Officially neutral, President Franklin D. Roosevelt is doing everything he can to help the Allies without actually going to war. The Lend-Lease Act, passed in March, has already turned the United States into the arsenal of democracy, sending billions in war materials to Britain and the Soviet Union. An undeclared naval war is raging in the Atlantic. In September, a German U-boat fired on the USS Greer. In October, the USS Kearney was torpedoed, killing 11 sailors. Then, on October 31st, the destroyer USS Reuben James is sunk, with the loss of 115 American lives. Roosevelt is baiting Hitler, practically begging for an incident that will unite the American public behind a war in Europe. But Hitler, for once, is showing restraint. He knows he cannot afford a war with the United States. Not now. Not while the Red Army is still standing. He orders Admiral Donitz and his U-boat wolf packs to stand down, to avoid American warships at all costs. The giant must remain asleep. Then, on December 7th, 1941, everything changes. The news of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor reaches Hitler at his Wolf's Lair headquarters in East Prussia. The initial reaction is pure ecstasy. Joseph Goebbels writes in his diary, "This means a tremendous relief for us." Hitler himself is giddy. He sees Japan as a godsend, a powerful ally that will bog America down in the Pacific for years. He tells his aides, "Now it is impossible for us to lose the war. We now have an ally in Japan who has never been vanquished in 3,000 years." Here is the crucial fact, the detail that makes what happens next so baffling. The Tripartite Pact, signed in 1940 between Germany, Italy, and Japan, was a defensive alliance. It stipulated that the signatories would come to each other's aid only if one of them was attacked. Japan was the clear aggressor at Pearl Harbor. Hitler was off the hook. His own foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, confirms this legal technicality. Germany is not required to do anything. He has the perfect excuse to sit back and watch two of his greatest enemies, the USA and the Soviet Union's Pacific rival Japan, tear each other apart. But Hitler doesn't see it that way. In the 4 days between Pearl Harbor and his fateful speech, he consults no one. not his generals, not his economists. The military high command, the OKW, is horrified by the prospect of war with America. General Alfred Jodl, chief of operations, knows the truth. Germany can't even supply its armies 600 miles inside Russia. How could it possibly project power across the 3,000 miles of the Atlantic Ocean? They are already facing the British Empire and the Soviet Union. Adding the world's largest industrial power to the list of enemies is military suicide. But they remain silent. They know Hitler's mind is made up. So why does he do it? The decision is a toxic cocktail of frustration, ideology, and pure, unadulterated hubris. He's tired of Roosevelt's provocations in the Atlantic. He feels America is already at war with him, and a formal declaration will finally let his U-boats off the leash to sink American ships at will. Ideologically, he despises Roosevelt and sees America as a weak, decadent, racially mongrelized society led by a Jewish conspiracy. He grotesquely underestimates its industrial might and its will to fight. He tells his inner circle that America, with its mixed-race population, could never field a truly effective army. But most of all, it's about ego. He sees Japan acting decisively on the world stage and feels compelled to match them. He wants to seize the initiative, to be the one dictating history, not reacting to it. Declaring war is an assertion of his power, a grand gesture for the history books. He is about to make the single greatest strategic miscalculation of his life. The day is December 11th, 1941. The Kroll Opera House, Berlin's acting parliament building, is packed with uniformed Nazi officials. The air is electric. Hitler walks to the podium, shuffles his papers, and begins to speak. For nearly 90 minutes, he delivers a rambling, venomous tirade, not against Britain, not against the Soviet Union, but aimed squarely at Franklin D. Roosevelt. He calls him the main culprit of this war, a man backed by the full diabolical meanness of Jewry. He lists the American provocations in the Atlantic, framing himself as the patient victim who has finally been pushed too far. The crowd hangs on every word, their applause thundering through the hall. Then comes the moment. Hitler's voice rises to a crescendo. He announces that he has sent a passport to the American chargé d'affaires and that, as of today, Germany considers itself at war with the United States of America. The chamber explodes. The deputies leap to their feet, arms raised in the Nazi salute, their cheers echoing for a full minute. They believe they are witnessing a moment of ultimate triumph. They are actually witnessing the beginning of the end. Miles away, in Washington, D.C., the reaction is not panic, but profound relief. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill is at the White House with Roosevelt when the news comes through. Churchill would later write, "I went to bed and slept the sleep of the saved and thankful." He knew what this meant. He said to Roosevelt, "We have won the war." Why? Because Hitler just solved Roosevelt's biggest political problem. Before this declaration, the American public was furious at Japan, not Germany. A powerful isolationist sentiment demanded that all American resources be thrown into a war of revenge in the Pacific. Roosevelt and his military planners knew the real threat was Nazi Germany and had secretly agreed with the British on a Europe-first strategy. But selling that to the American people would have been a political nightmare. Hitler's declaration of war instantly vaporized that problem. He single-handedly unified the American people against the entire Axis. He took the Japan first and Germany first debate off the table. Now it was simply war, total war, against all of them. Hitler didn't just add a new, impossibly powerful enemy to his list. He handed that enemy the political unity and public mandate to focus its full, terrifying power directly on him. In the first few months of 1942, Hitler's gamble seems to pay off. Unleashed from their restraints, German U-boats launch Operation Drumbeat, or Paukenschlag, against the unprotected American East Coast. They sink over 600 Allied ships in what U-boat crews call the second happy time. It's a bloodbath, but it's a fleeting victory in a war that has now become a simple, brutal equation of industrial output. And in that equation, Germany is doomed. Let's look at the numbers. In 1941, American GDP was already greater than Germany, Japan, and Italy's combined. Once mobilized, its output was staggering. In 1942, the United States produced over 47,000 aircraft. Germany produced just over 15,000. In 1944, America would produce nearly 100,000. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant alone was churning out a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. American shipyards were launching cargo vessels, the famous Liberty ships, faster than German U-boats could sink them. The war was no longer about brilliant blitzkrieg tactics. It was about attrition. It was about steel, oil, and bodies. And by declaring war, Hitler had challenged a nation that had more of all three than he could ever dream of. Invading the Soviet Union bled the German army white, a catastrophic mistake in its own right. But it was the declaration of war on the United States that made defeat an absolute certainty. It was a completely unforced error, an act of supreme arrogance. It ensured that when American, British, and Canadian troops landed on the beaches of Normandy in 1944, they would be supported by an air force that blackened the skies and a supply chain that stretched, unbroken, across the Atlantic. It was a war Hitler could have avoided, but chose not to. A choice made not on a battlefield, but in a speech that stands today as the single greatest blunder that cost Adolf Hitler the war.